And a D.C. federal judge today releasing special counsel Jack Smith's latest filing in the 2020 election case against former President Trump. The 165-page document outlining additional evidence that paints Trump's alleged criminal actions as those of a private citizen. The release comes after Smith filed a reworked indictment in response to the Supreme Court's presidential immunity ruling. He later asked Judge Tanya Chutkan to permit an additional lengthy filing to further explain why Trump's alleged actions were not part of his official duties. Smith refiles the same charges but states that the alleged scheme to overturn the election was a private one. Stephen Chung, a spokesperson for President Trump's campaign, called the release of the filing falsehood-ridden and unconstitutional. And right now, we're happy to have on national political strategist Brian Seichik, who joins us live to discuss the new indictment laid out by Jack Smith on Trump's 2020 election case. Brian, thank you so much for joining.
Happy to be here, Steve. Thank you.
Absolutely, Brian. Talk to us about some of the political implications of this new document. It is relatively close to an election. The DOJ typically has an unwritten rule or a policy where they don't charge and indict elected officials so close to an election, but it seems as though they're doing so now.
Well, there's a lot at play here. First of all, it's very clear that there's going to be no federal trial against Donald Trump before Election Day. And this is Smith's really only way to get the information out there. It's very much a data dump. He knows that there isn't time for the court to go through these matters and say, this is subject for trial, not subject for trial. And this sort of dump gives him an opportunity to put it all out there. Now, the real question is, what does this mean for the campaign? The fact is, I don't believe that there are any revelations here that are going to be new. This is already baked in. If you believe Donald Trump is guilty of obstructing the election, then you're a Harris supporter. If you think this is a unnecessary attack on the former president, then you're obviously with Trump. The problem with this indictment is that it takes time away from the Trump campaign being able to prosecute the case against Kamala Harris. Any day Republicans are not talking about inflation, immigration, the malaise in this country, that is a bad day for the Trump campaign. And I have said this for many months, including to you, if voters go into the voting booth thinking about Kamala Harris, Donald Trump wins this election. If the converse is true and Trump is on people's minds, I think it's probably going to be a good night for Kamala Harris.
Brian, I think you hit a lot of, if not all of the key points there. Although, like you said, this new filing probably won't change too many minds, it's certainly something that former President Trump probably would not like to be talking about 30 days out from an election. How should Trump's campaign respond?
They have to get off the subject as soon as possible. Again, they have to get back to inflation, immigration. Let's remember who the target here is. The real target in this election, and despite hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars being spent here, is a small group of suburban voters, specifically college-educated suburban women. And this new round of information against Trump does nothing to bring those folks home. These are the voters that were with Trump in 2016, these suburban women in Phoenix, Atlanta, Detroit, Michigan, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Those are the folks who were with Trump in 2016, but have really not been with the Republicans since then. And all of this news today is a distraction from trying to bring those folks home and get those people to vote for Donald Trump in November. It also takes us off what was clearly a very good debate last night by J.D. Vance. It's a VP debate, so let's keep it in perspective. But today should really be a victory lap for the Trump-Vance campaign on last night, and it's not. Instead, it's caught up in indictment chatter.
Now, Brian, I do want to get your thoughts on last night's vice presidential debate. During the debate, J.D. Vance brought up First Amendment rights and argued that censorship from big tech companies is actually the real threat to democracy, not what happened on January 6th. Does he make a strong counter-argument to what the Democrats are laying out?
Well, he did a nice job of getting off the subject. Abortion is not a subject that has played well for Republicans, both in the 22 election or as we head into November now. So it really was a nice way to get back to what I would call safe terrain, which is an area that is a better place for Republicans to talk about. I did think Vance did a nice job of sort of taking the shine off abortion, as it has been so hurtful Republicans. But overall, I think Vance really did have a good night. He had a strong command of the issues. He put a nice, smart, conservative face on a lot of the issues. And obviously, I believe it was helpful to the Trump Vance campaign. But the big winner was also Vance for president in 28. JD Vance has not had has not worn well in the public's mind since he was named the VP ticket. And last night really did a lot for him, really did a lot for his image. He sounded good. He looked good. He was smart. Last night was really a good night for him and a good night for Republicans overall.
Brian Seichik, appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
In the last confirmed debate of the presidential race is now over. Polling showing the public's reaction straight out of the gate. Some lawmakers taking to social media to give their opinion on the matter. Our Washington correspondent, Luis Martinez, joins us right now live in studio. It's great to have you back, Luis.
Great to be here with you, Steve.
So, Luis, you're following all the goings-ons on both sides. Who are you seeing when it comes to lawmakers reacting as to who won the debate?
Well, it was very interesting. I was hoping to see Twitter or X today blowing up with lawmakers reacting, but many of the big names refrained from making comments. Of course, some couldn't help themselves. We have Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican from Georgia, who immediately tweeted right after Senator J.D. Vance was interrupted by the moderators and his microphone was mute. And Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted that it was disgraceful that the rules of the debate weren't being followed. On the Democrat side, we saw a leader, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, take to social media and start doing some fact-checking himself, correcting, in his view, some statements J.D. Vance made on the Affordable Care Act and Trump's role in keeping it in law. So it was interesting to see that not everyone took to social media. I think there's something to be said, people who did not want to get into the conversation.
So it sounds like naturally everybody rallied to their respective camps and defended their candidate. So what were some of the most important moments in your takeaway from the debate last night?
Well, I think one of the most important moments that we can actually see it right now, if production cues it up for us, it's when Governor Tim Walz was questioned on his links to China. That moment was very interesting because, first of all, people were expecting that if anything was going to be brought up on Tim Walz's record to be corrected was how he has misrepresented his service during the National Guard. Instead, what came up was trips that he did to Hong Kong during the pro-democracy movement, and Tim Walz stuttered through the response and didn't actually explain why he was going back and forth to China. Another very big moment was when I mentioned earlier, J.D. Vance was interrupted by moderators who fact-checked him on immigration issues. And Steve, let's remember that both camps, Democrats and Republicans, had agreed to rules where the moderators were not going to fact-check, but this was going to be left to the people who were debating. Also very interesting in that, Steve, because the moderators corrected J.D. Vance, saying that the Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, were legal migrants, saying that they had temporary protective status. And that is correct, that Haitians, Venezuelans, and Cubans are some of the nationalities right now enjoying that the Biden administration allowed for them to enjoy of a temporary protective status. But most of them actually entered the country illegally and then applied for this temporary protective status that actually gives them also a work permit in some cases for up to 2 years. That was a very interesting moment. But I think that altogether, what we wanted to see in this debate is like the one rule for vice presidential debates is do no harm to your ticket. And I think both of them managed to do little harm. Walz didn't do too much harm to the Harris campaign, and J.D. Vance, as we just heard from Brian, many other commentators actually added to Trump's ticket. But also, J.D. Vance did something Donald Trump was not able to do as effectively during his debate, which was tying Tim Walz and Kamala Harris to Joe Biden. So at every turn whenever Tim Walz would say like, well, Harris is proposing to do this, this, and that, in housing we're going to do that, in immigration we're going to do that, J.D. Vance would always have the comeback of like, well, the person who has been in office for the past 3.5 years is your running mate. Why hasn't she done anything about it? And he did a great job at that. So Steve, the polls do show it. CBS YouGov poll actually shows that J.D. Vance won the debate. 42% think that he won, 41% think that Tim Walz won. Interesting, because this poll was 1,600 people were surveyed. They reported to have watched the debate, and 39% of them were Democrats, only 33 were Republicans, and still the audience thought that it was J.D. Vance who took the win.
Fascinating stuff. A lot of information packed in there. NTD's Luis Martinez, thank you so much. Thank you. And we will hear more perspective on the debate later in the show. Stay tuned for that. President Biden is traveling through areas ravaged by Hurricane Helene. He's meeting officials and first responders to survey the damage and the rescue efforts. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more from the White House.
President Biden is touring the destruction that Hurricane Helene has brought to the southeast. On Wednesday, Biden met with state and local officials and first responders in North Carolina and South Carolina. That was just after he approved the deployment of up to 1,000 active duty soldiers to help speed up the rescue and recovery efforts. He also said the ongoing dock workers strike could make it harder to get supplies into the hurricane-stricken regions. At least 180 people have died across 6 states during the storm, but that number could be much higher, as there are still hundreds unaccounted for. The majority are in North Carolina.
Additionally, since the storm passed, North Carolina has emerged as an area of particular focus after the historical levels of flooding that occurred in the western part of that state.
Hundreds of roads remain closed, making it difficult for rescuers and the delivery of aid. According to poweroutage.us, over 1 million customers are without power, mostly in the Carolinas. A bipartisan group of senators have sent a letter to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell asking them to pass legislation that would aid in the recovery efforts of Hurricane Helene, even if that means coming into session early. And earlier Wednesday, President Biden had a call with G7 leaders discussing the latest on the Israel-Iran conflict. President Biden said that he'll announce new sanctions soon on Iran because of the latest missile barrage on Israel.
We'll be discussing with the Israelis what they're going to do, but all 7 of us agree that they have a right to respond.
President Biden will then head to Georgia and Florida on Thursday to survey the damage brought by Hurricane Helene. Reporting from the White House, Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Israel and Iran appear to be on the brink of a larger conflict after Iran launching a barrage of missiles into Israel yesterday. This comes as Israel is keeping up the intensity against Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon. NTD's Jason Perry has the story.
On Wednesday, Israelis gathered around what was left of an Iranian missile that was fired at Israel on the previous day. That's one of the almost 200 missiles that Iran launched at Israel for what it says was to avenge the killings of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, an Iranian general who was killed in the same strike, and for a Hamas leader, Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed in Iran in July. Israel says that Iran's missile attack will not go unpunished.
We have the capabilities to reach and strike any point in the Middle East. And those of our enemies who have not yet understood this will soon understand.
Iran's president warned Israel on Wednesday, saying that if Israel does anything wrong, they will receive a far stronger response than the night before. However, Israel reported little damage from Iran's attack and only a few minor injuries, in large part because of Israel's air defense systems. Both countries faced off at the United Nations on Wednesday, with Iran's UN ambassador defending the recent attack on Israel.
Iran's missile strike were a necessary and proportionate response to Israeli continued terrorist aggressive acts over the past 2 months.
And Israel's ambassador to the UN said this.
Let me be clear. Israel will defend itself. We will act. And let me assure you, the consequences Iran will face for their actions will be far greater than they could ever have imagined.
This comes as the Israeli Air Force continues to strike terrorist targets in and around Beirut, and the Israel Defense Forces continue their ground offensive into southern Lebanon. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave his condolences to the families of 8 soldiers who recently died in the fighting there. Netanyahu also met with Israel's security chiefs in Tel Aviv as they prepare for retaliation against Iran. And President Biden said he agrees that Israel has the right to respond to Iran's attack, but they should respond proportionately. Jason Perry, NTD News.